Chapter 15 The Arcturian Council's second bedtime story about the Kreylah and the Morg. Channeled by Daniel Scranton.
And now, it is story time. For our story, we would like to tell you about a planet in a galaxy that is not too far from yours, and the people on that planet. The people on that planet were called the Morg, and the planet was Ortar. Now, Ortar, of course, had her own consciousness. And she gave life to the Morg. And they crawled out of her oceans and became the humanoid beings after millions of years of evolution, who started out living quite primitively, gathering whatever they needed, hunting at times, building, learning how to plant food and grow food, and then how to use the natural resources to create
primitive vessels in the same way that humanity on Earth
created your horse and buggies and items that could be made out of metal and so on. And they continued to evolve spiritually as well. And the planet was very happy with the way that things were going on her surface with the Morg. They looked very much like your human civilization in terms of how they were progressing. They were learning how to get along and how to share. And they continued to make advancements in their technology, so that soon they had more sophisticated ways of moving around and communicating and sharing information. They had gadgets for just about everything to make life easier. And they began to rely more and more on their electronics, on their gadgets. And soon they became very detached from nature. They were not as grounded on their planet as they were when they were more primitive. They were not as connected to the animal kingdom, the plants, the trees that they had. The oceans began to get polluted. They had garbage piling up. They didn't know what to do with it. The air became less breathable, less healthy. The water less drinkable, less safe even to swim in. And they could see that they were continuing to industrialize and continuing to rely heavily upon technology there didn't seem to be a solution to their ever-growing problem of toxicity on their planet. And then, of course, they were attracting the attention of some extraterrestrial beings. There was one group of extraterrestrial beings in particular who observed what was going on with the Morg from their spaceships. There were many. And they saw that the problems were growing and that there seemed to be no solution inside. And so they decided to help. These beings were called the Kreylah. And so the Kreylah slowly started to make their way into the consciousness of the Morg with flybys, visitations, so that people started to get excited about these extraterrestrials. And because of the need that they had for help, the Morg began to see these extraterrestrials as having the answers to all of their problems. And so the Kreylah came and eventually landed their ships and introduced themselves. And the Morg were happy to see them. They could see that they were a peaceful race of beings, and they could see their advanced technology. And the Kreylah were more than happy to help with the cleanup efforts on the planet. And so they began cleaning up using their technology, the oceans, the air, the soil, the waste. And they were able to reatomize things that were toxic, that were garbage, that no one ever would have wanted to touch or see or smell ever again. And the Morg were so very happy to have their problems solved. They had the advanced technology to ensure that they would be able to stay on their planet and continue living for a very long time. So the Kreylah saw that this was the case and also saw that the Morg were not really ready to travel through space with them. They could tell that the consciousness had not evolved to that point. And so eventually, when things had settled down and normalized, they left. And they continued to observe to see how things were going with the Morg. The Morg continued to rely upon technology. Now they had more technology to rely upon. And so they continued to have their innovations, their technological advancements on their own. They reverse engineered things that the Kreylah had given them. And they continued to be a society that relied very much on the mind and on science to further the technological evolution. But their spiritual evolution lagged behind. And so eventually they started creating technology that again was polluting the planet, and the devices given to them by the Kreylah were unable to assist with the new toxins that they were creating. The new problems needed new solutions. And what they came to realize eventually was that they could not fix their problems with technology. And so the Kreylah, watching all this happen, decided that the best thing that they could do now would be to return to the planet and see if they could help in another way. And so instead of bringing even more advanced technology, which they had, to help the Morg, they started to set up spiritual retreat centers, places where people could gather and meditate, places where people could go for healing, for chanting and toning and all sorts of spiritual practices, stretching. They had their own kind of yoga. And soon the Morg began to evolve spiritually and reconnect with nature. They began to love their plants and trees and animals. Their flora and fauna became more fascinating to them than their gadgetry and their devices. And they had more of a connection to source because of what the Kreylah had taught them. And in the elevating of their consciousness, in the releasing of that which was no longer serving them, vibrationally, emotionally, and in every other way, their consciousness began to create a healthier planet. Their consciousness was able to clean up their messes that were made by relying so much on technology and not enough on themselves and their abilities to create the reality that they want to experience, their abilities to change the vibrational nature of matter, and their abilities to move themselves around and communicate without any technology whatsoever. Their abilities to manifest out of thin air with no need for a machine to do it for them. You see, they were able to clean up their environment with the help that they really needed from the Kreylah, which was the help of advancing their consciousness, helping them to evolve spiritually instead of technologically. And the Kreylah learned a very important lesson themselves as they went on to help other civilizations on other planets and moons, and even space stations where they visited with beings that needed help moving forward with their spiritual evolution. And so the Morg eventually learned how to live in balance and harmony, to find where they could implement these technological advancements that they continued to discover, and where to rely more on themselves and their consciousness, and how to never get out of balance again. And so they continued to evolve and ascend, and soon they had light bodies. Soon they were fifth dimensional. And the need for technology then became less and less, and less and less. And the continuation of the expansion of their consciousness continued. And eventually they were asked to join with the Kreylah and the other extraterrestrial beings to co-create a federation where everyone could gather together and share their ideas and their practices and everything else that would serve the collective whole. And there was balance and harmony, and there was co-creation and collaboration. And there was a coming together through that time of adversity that was very fortunately transcended by everyone involved. It brought them closer together. And it made them realize the importance of going within and relying upon themselves for their power. And everyone lived happily ever after. We are the Arcturian Council, and we have enjoyed connecting with